Hi, I'm Mr. Scott, and today I'd like to talk to you about the culture of a good presentation. And what I mean by culture is when you're giving a presentation in English, you're not just translating a good presentation from Vietnamese, for example, into English, but you actually have to adopt some cultural aspects of a presentation in order to make a good presentation. You know, a good presentation in English is more than just good English. It also involves factors like register. Register means, is it formal or informal? Another factor would be humor, okay, having a good sense of humor in your presentation, style, and structure. So let's first start with register. It's been my observation that oftentimes presentations in Vietnamese are a little bit more formal than presentations in English or in English-speaking countries like the United States, for example. So it's important to not be overly formal when your audience is expecting a more informal presentation. So that has to do with register. Now let's move on to humor. When you're giving a presentation in English, it's a good idea to make use of humor. Humor is a very natural way that English speakers connect with the audience. It helps the audience to feel entertained, and it also is a good way for the speaker to get credibility with the audience if they can make a clever joke or even some clever comments. Now, with humor, we're not saying that your whole presentation has to be full of jokes, but it's a good idea, especially in your introduction, to be able to have something funny, or even in in the body, to just connect with the audience, make sure they're awake, they're paying attention, and include some humor. Now, the next thing is style. You might be thinking, well, what is style? Does it have to do with clothing? No, it doesn't have to do with clothing. Style has to do with how you are communicating with the audience. Now, in some cultures, a good presentation is taking a written draft and then just reading it, looking at the paper, not really looking at the audience, just reading it. Okay, that is not a good presentation in English. In some cultures, a good presentation is memorizing an essay and then reciting it. Unfortunately, that is also not the type of presentation that we're encouraging you to do in English. Now, for the purposes of this class, the type of presentations we want you to do are ones that don't seem like they are memorized and like they're reciting, because that sounds kind of robotic. And we don't want you to be robotic. We want you to sound natural. So it's important to have a good idea of what you're going to talk about, but to not have every single sentence rehearsed and memorized. It's important to know your content in such a way that you can talk about it like you're having a conversation instead of memorizing an essay. And finally, another cultural aspect that's important for a good English presentation is structure. And notice that the structure that we're encouraging you looks very similar to the structure of a 5-paragraph essay, where we start with an introduction, and then we have a body, which may consist of about 3 paragraphs or 3 main ideas, and then a conclusion. It's important to have this linear structure in your presentation to go from introduction, point 1, point 2, point 3, and conclusion. And in that structure, the introduction and conclusion are very similar in that they mention what the main idea is, they review or preview the main ideas, And it's also important that you are starting with an attention getter and then finishing with a closing statement that leaves the audience with an impression of the importance of your presentation. Okay. So following a logical linear structure is very important for your presentation, and this is very similar to writing a 5-paragraph essay. So once again, the culture of a presentation is very important. Giving a good presentation in English is not about translating a good presentation in Vietnamese. We have to take into consideration the register, or how formally or informally we're communicating. It's very important to include some humor. The style of your presentation is very important, about how you're communicating, not just like you're reciting something that's memorized, but speaking naturally. And then finally, following a linear structure. Well, I hope you are able to incorporate these things into your presentation. And feel free to watch this video repeatedly, because this is for your benefit. All right, see you next time.